Hi and welcome. My name is Mikael Klenissen, and I am the author of the book Manipulation and a Weapon of Guilt: Collectivism Exposed. This video, or in other words, broadcast, has been made by request from one of my followers, a Casper, a citizen of Denmark, that requested to know why I currently live in Thailand. So I can see that as people are starting to log in and log on and start participating in this broadcast, I think I'm going to start by explaining a few things about what I'm going to explain in this video. There are many elements that I am simply not going to be able to either remember or put in it. So if you check out the video later, below the video, I will place my asylum application as a part of the comments. So check it out, read the story. There's no way I can I can explain everything in this this live show perfectly. A few things are important to explain before I start. One is that I officially wanted a lot of the stuff that I'm going to explain in this broadcast. I wanted to put that out there when I finalized my book, and there is a lot of stuff out there about average daily life and how reckless the government is in general. So I think it's important to explain that the reason why I didn't put this out there is that collectivists in general, which I try to explain, can twist truth to any extent. If you give them anything, and it's also something I work with in chapter 4, where I try to explain that a collectivist or these people will go in, they will try to pinpoint little details in you and start using them against you. So if you're open-minded and are not afraid of being self-critical and open about whatever mistakes you make in life or so forth, they will pinpoint little details and tune in and use them against you. So some of the stuff that I'm going to explain in this broadcast is going to be quite controversial. It is so, and maybe I should start by explaining earlier that, or before I start, explaining how the government in Denmark works. The government in Denmark is very different from a communist government that we see in former Russia and whatever tyrannical governments are out there. It's very different. The system in Denmark is made in a way that it's always made in a sense that let me give you an example. A punishment, going to prison is not very harsh. Everything is built on a system where you can't really point fingers at the government. Currently, the government in Denmark is known as one of the least what do you call it? The least, not criminal, corrupt governments in the world. And it is so because everything is convoluted. It is twisted and turned around. It is so in the sense that, and these are facts, only 2% of all cases in Denmark leans towards the plaintiff. And Danish people know perfectly well that regardless what you do against the government, the chance of winning against the government is next to none. This means that no one prosecutes the government. No one goes against the government because there's nothing you can do. You can't do anything. This government is completely authoritarian, and it will twist and turn any law or paragraph or whatsoever in its own favor. I will explain certain things today about elements in the system, but maybe I should start by explaining that the Danish system is absolutely a mixture between Fabian socialism, or in normal term, so democratic socialism, and a fascist kind of nationalist socialist system. And you find, the elements on the left to be the, communist kind of things, and then on the right wing in Denmark, which is not a right wing, but I'll get into that in a moment, you will find the more fascist approach. But anything in Denmark is a complete planned economy. The farthest right-wing political party is a center left-wing party. 70% of the people that vote for the farthest right-wing political party still believes that government should provide education free of personal charge. And that does not align with any form of right-wing ideals whatsoever. There is no right wing in Europe whatsoever, except for Switzerland. European countries are completely, collectivist in all aspects of life, but it's democratic, which creates this flow forth and back. Unfortunately, in a country like Denmark, everything is left. And when you look at the Danes currently, you will see that most Danes have gotten to a point. I mean, even the left-wingers are like, come on, man, it doesn't matter which side I vote for. They just speak and nothing happens. They just, everything in Denmark is completely a lie. They just talk and talk and talk. And of course, the perfect illusion of freedom is created in Denmark, because you actually have 8, 9 different political parties, and you can kind of vote for whatever you find is mostly you. But the joke is there is no right wing, so everything's obscured in the sense that, as I see it, it's all collectivist party, all of them. We do have a small minority of people out there that, and I think it's next to none, maybe 30,000 out of almost 6 million people in Denmark that are actually real right-wingers and libertarians and further out right-wing anarchists and so forth. And of course, the whole paradigm that the world is subject to, which is the right and left, which is a complete illusion. Anyone who knows this is a joke, because you can never place anything on it. You can never place philosophy on a paradigm of left and right, but you can place everything on a paradigm that goes from no government to less government, towards bigger government, eventually huge government, and then tyranny and so forth. And it is pretty simple, because I'm actually gonna work with this a lot, and I already did in the book I already sent out there. I'm gonna work a lot with this, using psychology to explain boundaries and how these personal boundaries from a libertarian perspective or anarchist perspective, which is that this is my body, that's your body, I respect your body, you respect mine. And those boundaries become more narrow and narrow and narrow as we go along with the paradigm towards a bigger government. There are absolutely no boundaries in a country like Denmark. So to put these things into perspective, I think it's important to explain that someone like Bill Clinton would have been an extremist, far right-winger in a country such as Denmark's. And most people in Scandinavia would view someone as Clinton as an extremist, right-winger. At least if you're in Denmark and you have the same views as someone like him, you are an extremist. So getting into the whole idea of explaining my case and why I left Denmark, why I ended up in this debacle that I went to. I left Denmark when I was 17, more or less. Started leaving Denmark, came back a little bit, few months, went again, lived in Spain many years, as I describe in the book, and so forth. And at least a full 14 years of my life, until I was 35, I would have lived abroad in many different various countries, among 6 years in America, 7 seasons in Spain, traveling around the world. I lived in, and do not forget that I said 7 seasons in Spain, not years. But I actually lived about little over 5 years in Australia with my ex-wife. Eventually, I had enough of Australian behaviors when I lived there, and I eventually brought my family back to Denmark, and we went back to Denmark in 2008. Prior, and these are important things, because I think in life it's important to be self-critical. Is it really me that there's something wrong with? In all these years prior to living in Denmark, I had an absolutely clean criminal record whatsoever. I come back to Denmark, and only 4 months later, I end up in a debacle with a person outside a bakery in center Copenhagen. It's morning. I just went to an ATM, and I took out of the ATM the equivalent of a $50 bill. These are about 200 kroners, a 200 kroner bill. And unlike in America, where you actually have bills that look alike, and you could make the excuse that you can't notice, you can't see the difference between them. In Denmark, 100 kroners is brown, and a 200 kroner bill is green, and there's no excuse for a mistake like this. So I go into this bakery, and I end up paying some horrendous amount for 2 donuts. 2 donuts for, I don't remember, it's like $40 or something crazy. I don't remember what I paid, because of course I had to kind of change currency to explain this. But the main point is that the lady, I'm approaching the lady and saying, listen, there's something wrong here. I gave her a 200 kroner bill, and she looks at me and said, no, you only gave me a 100 kroner bill. And I said, no, absolutely not. And if you have a problem with this, well, then check out your register, and you can count your money and whatever. I'll be waiting. I don't have a problem with this. And of course, we started having she started giving me an attitude, and I get an attitude too. And there's another person right next to me that kind of starts, making this his business. And eventually, he was being annoying. And eventually, I just said, "Dude, enough, man. Leave me alone, man." And he kept on going. And eventually, I just got fed up with him and said, "Dude, enough. You better freaking take care, man." And he sticks his face right next to mine, and he says, "No, you be wary." Really, really, intimidating kind of behavior. And I was like, I know Danish people, and they're tall puppies. They quack and they talk, and it's always the same. They are not fighters. Everyone that knows a Dane know that they just, like the little dog you meet, they bark loud and that's it. I mean, there's nothing to it. So I just said, you know what, dude, if you have a problem, you can wait outside for me. And, eventually this lady had enough and was like, okay, now I can see that there are more problems here than just me. So she threw this money on the desk and said, here you go. The man had left prior to this, and I go outside, and he, of course, approaches me out there and started, becoming a big smart man and so forth. And we were talking a little forth and back, and eventually I approached him, went pretty close to him, and I said, "Dude, if you really wanted to hurt me, you would have done it by now." And he looks at me really, he's still trying to, be this fearful guy. And he said, "You better be wary." And I said, "Wary of what?" And he said, "I have something in my pocket." And at that moment, in the same instance, he sticks his hand in his pocket, and I fired a right one. Absolutely. And of course, there's nothing more to this story except, I disarmed, or whatever you call it. I reacted. And I should say, as I said, never happened before, but I had an absolutely spontaneous reaction. I don't know what was in this pocket, and I could see right after I fired a right one, nothing else to it. He was lame and tame as a little puppet, like I usually say. So there's nothing else to it. I didn't feel any fear. There was nothing to it. I turned around and I left. I walked home slowly, about 3-minute walk to my house. I walked into my apartment, and a little later, about 20 minutes, half an hour later, I am knock on the door. Police comes to pick me up. And of course, I find out later that some lady on a bike had followed me. And not much to it. I got interrogated, got left. The police let me go. And I think about 3 months go by, and I go into court. And the curious thing about the court case is that, of course, people lie. And this is one thing, that's the whole joke about the whole court system. When you swear, going to say the truth and nothing but the truth. I walked in, I explained my story, and that was my view. Exactly the way I explained things here. I'll make these statements later. The witness, a lady in her late 50s, I assume, explained her story from my point of view, except she believed I had punched him twice. It doesn't really make the case much different. But there was a discrepancy, but that was the only discrepancy that she made. I should state that the man, the accused, or the victim, as they call it, had stated, or I listened to his statement, and he explained how I had walked out, I had taken off my glasses, I had put them on the ground, I had taken my coat off, which is a fairly expensive coat, and I put it on the ground. This is November. We've got wet streets and so forth in Copenhagen. And I had left it and wanted to fight him. Of course, the lady explained that this had absolutely nothing to do with the truth. She explained everything I just told you, nothing else to it. There's not so much more to the story except the fact that he was proven to be lying, absolutely lying about the case, trying to make me this bad guy and so forth. Also, I requested that there was a video from the bakery that be used in court, and it was denied. It would have proven that I would have hit the man only one time, and backed up my story that it wasn't some kind of walk around and being two big men. I just simply reacted. I don't know what you would have done, but I am about 35 years at that point in my life and never tried such a thing before. I reacted. I did so, and there's nothing else to it. I'm not going to justify it or not justify it. I handled, the way I look at it, it was a self-defense act, and of course, this is what I claimed in court. Last but not least, in court, this man actually is asked about what he had in the pocket, and explains that he had a press card, an identification card from the press. And I sat there and I really had to hold my myself back, with this whole thing. I mean, from not laughing in the middle of a courtroom that this man was going to show me a press ID when he had just intimidated me basically to fight. So, but long story short, I made a foolish thing. I should have walked away. I agree. I reacted. I was foolish. Not much else to it. I was eventually convicted to a 40-day sentence, which was probation. In other words, I was not given a jail sentence. If I did anything within 1 year, I would go to jail and get my 40 days. Nothing else to this story. So now I'm, for the first time in my life, convicted as a violent offender. We can, of course, move on to more elements to this. A little year later, get divorced from my now ex-wife. We went through quite some harsh times. I paid good money for going to, therapy with her, and it was all problems with the way we brought up our children. Of course, me as a person, being an extremely far right-wing person, opposed to, and slowly through life finding out that I had married a communist, created extreme problems in our way of bringing up our children, because it was like a 1 versus a 10, and the things are so complicated that I went to therapy, and of course I moved personally from my level of doing things to kind of meet her, meet her ways, but she never moved. And even the psychologists that helped agreed that she was absolutely not willing to go in any way away from her ways of doing things. There was no way that she was going to change nothing. Eventually, we got divorced. Things worked fairly well after a divorce. I had my children 7 days, and she had them then 7 days. So we had what we call a 7-7 arrangement. And that worked for more or less until 14 days before I left Denmark in 2015, July 2nd, 2015. In this meantime, coming back to Denmark, I really had a revelation. And I'm not talking about a religious form of revelation, but with all the years prior, and having lived with a person that was, physically abused, had been subject to incest, I had fallen in love. And not a lot of people that follow my work do know that the reason why I started studying psychology was because of my ex-wife. I found out that she had been abused, and in this, this basically forced me to start reading about what happens to people like this, and I came across narcissistic personality disorder, and I fell in love with the idea of researching narcissism at that point. Not only did I see traits in myself, but I saw a lot in her, and eventually got to the point where I believed that there was severe narcissism here. So basically, I had a slow research era from 2001 until 2008, when I had gone back to Denmark. And then coming back to Denmark, it was like a car hitting me with 200 kilometers an hour. That was something dead wrong in Denmark, absolutely dead wrong in Denmark. And I really started writing, and I just couldn't stop writing. And I started writing tons of different stuff, and started researching, and and really I just couldn't stop. And this goes on until the end of 2011, when I finally felt ready to start blogging about my knowledge about Denmark. And I bought manipulism.com at that point and started blogging. And it doesn't take much, I mean, it doesn't take long until I start seeing, start getting phone calls. And I should say this, I have a number. Basically, I'm a registered, I have a registered business in my country because of having a business prior. In other words, my phone number was unregistered. And I get these phone calls, and I get a lot of phone calls like this from unregistered numbers, withheld ID. And I don't pick up the phone ever. But one day, and I honestly don't remember when it was, if it was early 2012, I pick up the phone. And anyone that lives in Denmark knows that unlike in America, other countries, you present yourself when you call someone. In other words, hello, this is Mikkel. Am I speaking to John? But in America, you might say, hello, is this John? That's fine. But in Denmark, you don't. And I pick up the phone and I hear this kind of, male voice, firm, is this Mikkel? And I'm like, no answer. I didn't answer him. And I said, to whom am I speaking? And I hear some things, and it's kind of like, yeah, but I'm here, and they're avoiding my question, never answering my question of who am I speaking to, not identifying themselves. This person didn't identify himself, and I'm like, you know what? Enough. I don't know who you are. I'm not interested in whatever you are trying to sell me. And I hear. One of the last things, as I hang up, I hear something about manipulism, and I hang up. I never picked up the phone again. Of course, we can sit here and talk about this and big or government or whatever. I have an absolute feeling that this was government. Absolutely. In this January 2012, I am, unlike other dads, in this indoor, and it's cold in Denmark. Do you remember that? It's January, and we have this place called Capella Play, and it's an indoor playground. You pay some money, go in, you play with your kids, and have fun. And me, unlike other Danish dads, is the type of person that runs around playing with my children, and eventually the whole 10 kids are following, and we play catch or whatever. That's the type of dad I am. While the Danish people that are so social and happy sit and read their newspaper, but eventually crawling around, something happened in my knee, and quite quickly, I think the day after, I go to a doctor and find out that I have this cartilage within my knee, a piece of cartilage about 1 by 1 centimeter, so it's about that big, rolling around my knee. I was absolutely unable to walk normal, humping around. And it's important to explain this, because what happens next is one of the most crazy things I've ever tried in my life. We get a little further into February 17th, 2012. And I should state this before I explain the story, that in Denmark, levies imposed in hundreds of different ways. In Denmark, they have something called a TV license. That means that you can own, in the old days, no, it's not even a TV license anymore. Sorry, it's actually called a media license now. It used to be called a TV license, because the Danish government owns, today, but prior it was only 1 channel and 3 or 4 radio channels, stations, and these channels you must pay for regardless if you want to, because the claim is that you can listen to this radio, and you can view the channel, which is DR one, or in the old days. Now there are more channels from from the Danish government, but you must pay them, and it's a yearly fee of about 400 American dollars. And it's one of the ways that the Danish government tries to impose levies or forms of taxes in all its different forms. And I am absolutely not going to pay them. Not only am I not going to pay them because it's absolutely deeply delusional, but also it's absolutely against the amendments. We have a 72nd and 73rd Amendment that completely stands against this. They don't have the right to do it, but the Danish government will twist the truth to any extent, and they don't care. They make laws, but they don't uphold them themselves. But Danish people can, of course, claim that they don't have any whatsoever media equipment. But even if you have a phone, you can receive this. So there's no way that you can avoid paying this anymore, except you can just tell them that you don't want to pay it. And what happens then is that they will have these media license people, government employees that comes and snoops around your apartment. And anyone in Denmark who's rebellious and autonomous will not pay this. And it's a big thing in Denmark to there's a big fight about if I just make a product online and suddenly tell everyone that, oh well, because you have the option of using, example, Facebook or YouTube, well then you must pay for this because you can use it, so now you must pay for it. And it's a sick notion. And in other words, I don't pay for it, and I never will. So one night, 17th of February 2012, I'm sitting at home reading aloud, bedtime stories to my two children. We're sitting in bed, and there's a knock on my door. Of course, I stop reading, and I walk, over to the door and open it, and there's a guy standing outside. And he looks up at me and says, "Hello, this is a DR, which is called DR, Media License Control." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you don't pay a media license." And I said, "No, and I never will." And I closed the door again. Nothing else to it. They don't have the right, and the Constitution in Denmark does actually state that the private or the home is absolutely inviolable. I think it's called in English. You cannot intrude. Whatever goes on within your four walls is yours. You do have that privacy, just like in America. But the government in Denmark does not care. Like in America, they have to have a warrant to enter your home. But in Denmark, they have to have the same thing. But if the police violates this rule, they will just come up with some crap and then whatever. There are no standards for this. As I said again, the government in Denmark does whatever it wants. It makes laws, but does not uphold the laws themselves or itself. I closed the door. I walked back. And as I walk back, this man is continuously knocking on my door. I just thought of it as nothing, and I thought it's going to stop. I walked back, and imagine sitting right now and counting about 40 seconds. And I went back, I sit down with my children, and I start reading again. And I got to a point of what I estimate to be about 40 seconds. And he had knocked for 40 seconds, and eventually it was just enough. And I blew up. I just went to the door, and I opened it, and I'm absolutely sorry about saying this, but I literally hoped that I would hit him in the face with the door. Enough. I mean, come on. I locked the door. You have no more rights. Go away. Nothing else to it. But he had actually just moved away at that instance and had his back turned on me at that point. And I opened the door and I said, "Enough. Now it's enough." And he turns around and sticks a finger right in my face. And he says, "You just behave." And I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And I walked straight to him and I said, you get away from my, from my premises here. And I just literally just screamed, shouted, intimidated, coerced him off my premise. But I can promise you with absolute certainty, I didn't ever lay hand on this man whatsoever. He got intimidated. I was yelling, screaming, no doubt about it. And eventually he walks away from, he goes away, and in his way away from me, I see him calling the police. I wasn't worrying. I walked back into my house, started reading to my kids, and nothing else happens. Absolutely nothing else happens until about 3 weeks to a month later. I don't remember exactly. When I start getting phone calls from the police, and I'm absolutely not authoritarian. So when they call me up and say, "Hello, this is the police," I go, "Sorry, I don't want what you're trying to sell me." I can be quite provocative. I don't care. They can't hurt you whatsoever. Hung up. There's nothing else to it. About a little over a month later, I'm coming home midday, and outside my door there's a lady, and I'm saying hello, and she says, "Would you know about a Mikkel Nissen?" I said, "Yes, that's me." And she says, "Well, you're served." And I'm like, "What? Am I served?" Okay. So I look at this, and I am being served for having suddenly beaten this man. Now comes the whole fun story, and make sure that you understand this. This is public record, so there's no way that I'm just telling you a story. This is absolutely public record in Denmark, so take it as you want. But I am, of course, being told that I had beaten him, and I laughed to myself and thought, whatever. I don't know what's going on. Some time goes by. I get appointed a lawyer. And I meet this lawyer, and short story, I found out that he had gone to the police that night. A thorough investigation had been done. He had no bruises. He had no whatsoever bruises that night, and he had made a statement. It was over. Police never went to my apartment or whatsoever. I was never ever accused of it. I don't know what happened, but nothing had happened that night. The next morning, he goes to a completely different city, even though he lives in the same city as me, and the same city that he had gone to the police and accused me of beating him. He goes to a completely different city, even though there's a hospital in this city that could have carried out the same task that was done the day after. But he goes to a completely different city and gets some kind of medical statement from a nurse that states there are no bruises in face, there are no bruises whatsoever. All they find is a red mark on the back of his thigh, a 3.3-inch mark on the back of his thigh. And it's a very curious little thing, because there wasn't any assurance that it was a bruise whatsoever. Okay, so we get to a point where a few months later, I go to court, and of course I thought it was all a joke, and I presented my case with what I explained earlier in the video, which is that I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk. I literally couldn't walk on one leg properly. And in this case, this man starts saying that I had kneed him. He had turned around, and I had kneed him. I had beaten him in the face, in the kidneys, in the stomach, in the neck, all kinds of places. Unfortunately for him, there was no bruises or no proof whatsoever. He had this one mark on the back of his thigh, and there are even public record of and photos of this man the night that this supposedly occurred, but no bruises. Funny enough. I tried to present in court that it was simply impossible that this could have been done, because I couldn't walk properly on one leg. In other words, I should have kneed him with a leg or a knee that I was absolutely in pain, that I had pain in, or with the other knee and standing on a knee that I had pain in. So basically, there was absolute proof that he was completely lying. Also, in this case, this man is told or asked to present his version of the story, and he says he comes to my apartment, and all windows and doors in my apartment are open. And the messed up situation with this is that he's like all Danish people, when they make up their illusions or lies, don't think of the consequences behind the lie. Because we're talking about February 17th, which is horrendously cold in Denmark. And quite quickly, my lawyer stands up and says, well, let me ask you this. If all his windows and doors were open and you could just peek in and see that he was there, does that sound plausible in February? And of course, he just... So there was so much proof in this case that it was all just a hoax, because I stood up against the system, a system that breaks its own laws. And even more crazy, and this is something from an American viewpoint, when I stepped in, and do understand this, by law in Denmark, you do not have, you have the right to, just like in America, to claim, you claim the Fifth Amendment, I don't want to speak, I want to stay silent. I did. And when the trial started, the judge looks over at me and he says, you look, and I forget the words exactly, you look like you are, oh shoot, I forgot the word, I'm really sorry. It's been a long time, I've left this behind me. I don't remember, but he says that I was, yeah, you look guilty. He literally used the words, you look guilty. I mean, you come into this room with chairs and tables like we are in the 60s, like some communist kind of courtroom with old furniture, like something that you whatever. And yeah, eventually I was given 60 days in jail. Of course, I appealed the conviction. And of course, I was convicted because I already at that point had a prior sentence, which of course backed up that I'm this violent and bad man. Fair enough. That's how the system works. But in the end, I, of course, had the chance now to appeal, and I did. And we had a few months until this case was presented for, I don't know what you call it, but higher court, not high court, but higher court. And prior to this, I really started working with this, constructively and very deep, because I knew that there was absolute proof of my innocence and absolute proof that there was complete discrepancies here in the way that things were presented. I simply couldn't have done it. And curiously, I asked my lawyer to make sure that the nurse that had made the statement about this mark on his thigh, or the back of his thigh, which is the only mark in this man, and that she be a witness in court and that we could interrogate her. And the funny thing is, they couldn't find her. They couldn't find her in one of the most Big Brother systems in the world, where everyone has a number, like a sheep or a cow, where everyone has a number. They couldn't find her. And eventually my lawyer said, well, if you can't find her, we have the right to say, well, then you have to let the case go, because we have the right to have that witness in court. And oh, oops, suddenly they find this nurse. And of course we go to court and I present more, and this time I actually chose to speak, and I presented the way that his lies were, presented the discrepancies in everything that he said, no bruises, going to police, photos taken, no bruises, nothing to present. There was no case because nothing happened. A screaming man, but not a beating man. But this is how the system works. You stand up against the system in Denmark, and I promise you, they will twist the truth to an extent to subjugate you, and because there's no way. I should state that in Denmark, at least until 2006, you could actually incarcerate people without without trial, without any extent of time, for any extended time. It's not until 2006 that you could put people in solitary confinement for any extent of time whatsoever. And they were breaking, at that point, I don't know if you call it the Geneva Convention or whatever. To this day, the law has changed. So now you can only put people in solitary confinement for up to 8 months without a conviction. I just have to drink a little. I'm getting sore throat. So now I've explained certain things, and I officially didn't ever want to explain these things because things can be twisted. But again, things are public record, so there's nothing to hide, and I have nothing to hide. But due to these factors, I am going through 2013, and I finish Slowly Manipulation and the Weapon of Guilt, Collectivism Exposed, which I published in 2004. No, sorry, I go through 12, finishing the book, or at least the prequel, and in 2013, on 14th of March, which is the day that Karl Marx died, I did that purposely. I'm actually going to, I don't remember if it was that point, a little later, supposed to serve my sentence of 60 days. I did that incarcerated in my own house with a GPS on my foot. So even with 2 trials, absolute proof that I hadn't done anything wrong, I still got 60 days in jail. The joke about it is that when I walk out of the courtroom at the second trial, my lawyer looks at me and says, "There's nothing more we can do." I found out a little later that this was an absolute lie. This man lied straight to my face. I could have appealed to High Court at that point without any problems whatsoever. But unfortunately, due to Danish law, I couldn't appeal because at the point I found out that I actually had the right to appeal again. I found this out about a month and a half later, and that was over the due date of making an appeal to High Court. So everything in Denmark is built on a system where there's this pretense of a justice system. Again, for my own, personal, what do you call it? I just have to make the statement that prior to living, in Denmark, I've been abroad 14 years, lived in various different countries, and never been in trouble with the law, never been in fights whatsoever. You come back to Denmark, and hell is loose. Of course, I went on my tour to America at that point. I went to America in October 2013, and I traveled around the world, traveled around America, with my book, trying to get people to start getting an interest in my work. And 10 days before, I was supposed to return to Denmark, I had what I would refer to as a nervous breakdown. I had been convicted for something I had never done, and 60 days is a joke. I mean, I had it in my house, and there was nothing. The government even pays for everything, and you just sit at home. There was nothing to it. It was a joke, waste of money. But it's still more that you have this title on you, suddenly you are a violent man, and that you have this thing on you. And also, I think what happened was that, due to the fact that I had been doing excessive psychological research, not only myself but sociological, and this research on the Danish citizens, since more or less 2008. It's like 5 years of intensive research focusing on all this negative stuff, and eventually I don't think that people can take it. In my case, I got a severe depression. Things went by. I actually started taking antidepressants at that point. And I should also state that I did not drink on a regular basis before I went to Denmark whatsoever. I am the type of person who is not even a weekend drinker. But when I went back to Denmark, within a year, I was on about one beer, and a year later in 2009, 2 beers a day. And it went up until I reached about a 6-pack of small beers more or less every single day. But when I returned to Denmark, I really, really started drinking severely. I am a happy drinker. I'm not the type of person that gets in trouble. I can still cook. I can still write books. I can still do normal stuff when I drink. But I drink heavily, and I also took antidepressants or antidepressants, and I did so, and it started working. The depression started fading away slowly in 2014, and at that point, in my deepest emotional, furthest down I've ever tried being in my personal life, ever. I At that point, and I should state very, very clearly that I do not believe that you have the right to hit your children. I can only say that my personal point of view is that if you have the need to, hit your children, there's something wrong with you and the way you bring up your children. I brought up my children through an individualistic child upbringing. I taught my children from an early age, when I could start working with these things, the very simple steps towards becoming an individualist. And I have already written all of this stuff, and written in an entire child upbringing psychology in the philosophy of individualism. When it comes out, it will come with complete way of bringing up your child to become an individualist. And I did so by explaining to my children that, it was their body and it was my body, and everything was worked around that. I also made a prior video where I said the proudest dad in the world, where I explain about the situation with my daughter that comes in, because you can only work with your child in various stages. First, you teach them that it's their body, theirs. Because what you do in this sense is that you are creating a sense of self in the child. The child, if you want to create the highest empathetic human being in the world, you create a person that understands that their body is theirs and no one has the right to intrude whatsoever. When you've done that, and they really have this understanding about their own body, they will give that to anybody else in the world. And that created a very, very unique bond or balance in the way I bring up my children, which created an atmosphere in my house where there was absolutely no problems whatsoever. One rule, I would simply say, are you intruding right now? And they would think about that one rule: her body, his body, their body, and so forth. And we would work that way with everything. One day my daughter comes to me and she says, "Daddy, daddy, daddy, you lied to me." And I said, "What? Did I lie?" And she said, "Yes, you told me that there are no rules in freedom." And I said, "What?" But then again, I can only teach you so much. And my oldest daughter looks at me and she says, "Yes, but you are not allowed to abuse your freedom. In other words, you're not allowed to use, abuse your other people's body," and so forth. She already stood this at an age of probably 7, 8, or 9. I don't remember when this happened. So it's really possible to bring up children to understand these boundaries between self and other, and create an absolute freedom enthusiast. Without it, I didn't have to be authoritarian to my children whatsoever, ever. But the problem with my child upbringing that occurred is that it created an imbalance between me and my ex-wife, because she was completely authoritarian, and that meant that my children lived in a household 7 days, 7 days of absolute rules and this and that, and you must do this and whatever. And then they came home to me where everything was relaxed. There was no authoritarianism. There was just simple rules. My kids were happy. We never argued. If there was any argument, it was always between the children. But I should say that one of my children, the youngest one, is pretty rebellious, which is really something I love in this girl. And I loved her for it. She was very, 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 very autonomous. And there was this little thing between her and her sister, older sister. And I simply at some point had enough, because she couldn't calm down. It was winter, and I simply told her to go outside and play in the snow for a cool down a little bit. She comes in about half an hour later, and obviously she was not calm. I had to do some things, and I had to get out of the house at that point, and she really got in my way annoyingly. Not in the way, but she was annoying at that point. And I literally took this little girl, and I took her by the shoulders, and I lifted her and shook her and said, enough. Once again, I've never laid hand on my children. This is the only time. And do understand, again, I was in severe depression at that point. I know I did wrong. I would never hurt my children. And there's nothing else to this story. I shook my child. I lifted my child, a 8-year-old child at that point, lifted her, shook her, and said, enough, and put her back down again on the floor. Never thought more of this. She calmed down. We walked out, we shopped, and did whatever things we had to do. And very shortly after this, suddenly have the government up my butt. And I have to be interrogated. I go in, and I found out, there was all this stuff, and she had been interrogated. By the government, or the commune, as we call it, the city hall. And there was not much to this story. They didn't have anything on me, really. But at that point, I already knew that what was going on for real was that my ex-wife, who I already knew at that point, had had enough at Denmark herself, being an Australian, wanting to go back to Australia. So I already knew at that point what was going on. And a couple months go by, and this is really building up. I can hear the lies. I can hear things my ex-wife is saying, that there's something here building up toward a case where she wants full custody. There's not much in me anyway, except, of course, the things I told you prior. So I'm the bad man, but I have good kids that speak well of me. And what, I had a good life at that point. But at that point, I simply made the decision that I'm not going to stay in this country, because I had already prior only stayed in Denmark for one reason, and that was my children. I wanted to stay in my children, stay in Denmark for the sake of my children, and there was nothing else to it. But now that I saw this happening, foresaw a future where I might see my children whenever it might fit my ex-wife, maybe a week, once a week, once every fortnight, whatever. I made a clear decision to myself that I had enough of Denmark. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I felt persecuted. And I also, we get to a point where my kids are interrogated. I took my kids in, and they interrogated my kids. They came out and said, your kids are beautiful. It seems like you're a good dad, and there was nothing wrong here. But still, everything continued. One day, in this whole debacle, my oldest daughter looks up at me and says, Daddy, did you know that Mom actually beats us? And I said, what? Does Mom hit you? And I should state the fact that that in Denmark, it is absolutely illegal to lay a hand on your children. So, of course, I went to the government, and they didn't want to do shit. Excuse my French. Nothing. They didn't want to do anything. Of course, they wanted to look at me, but they didn't want to look at my wife, ex-wife. Nothing. No interest whatsoever. I went to the police. I actually literally took my children to the police and filed a statement, or filed a case against my ex, because then the police has to contact the government and file a case against this. And all this stuff happened. Kids again interviewed, and all that I hear, I call them up, and I hear all these excuses from these people. The case against me for shaking my daughter continues, of course, but the excuse for not doing anything against my ex is that she apologized. She apologized and told this social worker that she would never do it again. So at this point, I literally had enough. I literally had enough, and I made a decision that over, done. I'm going to drink myself to death in Denmark. If I stay, I'm going to be on antidepressants the rest of my life. I cannot deal with this country anymore whatsoever. So I used the next about 8 months slowly preparing my children for what was to come. The fact that daddy was going to leave, I worked with them very, slowly psychologically, trying to explain that daddy couldn't live in a society where there was no freedom, where I was a slave, where I just had to follow suit and had no rights whatsoever, and that my work would, only things would only get worse and worse and worse, and I would stay in Denmark and probably never see them anyway, because everything would be up to her, and I just couldn't deal with it. I knew where this was going. I knew that at that point my ex-wife was going to leave for probably Australia, wherever she wanted to leave Denmark. I was quite certain that that was the point, and at that, I've seen the proof after. I should state that I mentioned earlier in the video that the reason why I actually used the alias Mikkel Clare Nissen, my middle name from my dad's side is actually Claire, but I never used it. But I actually started using it after I get these funny phone calls from government. So to those people who's been here all the way, I started using an alias to make sure that no one walks around throwing stones through my window or whatever found me, in case there was crazy people out there. Of course, there has been a lot of threats out there, but they usually come through Facebook and so forth. I've tried a lot of stuff. But the main point is, on July 2nd, and I should state again, I'm very rebellious. So even though all these things started to build up in Denmark, I literally just said, no, I'm not participating. I'm going to leave. You have fun. You know what? I cannot do this anymore. If you're going to take complete charge of the kids, that's what's going to happen. I can't stop you. So I prepared my children best I could for the fact that daddy was going to leave. And it's not because of them or whatsoever. And tried to make sure that there was no guilt whatsoever for anything. And I also prepared them for the fact that they might be completely stopped from seeing me and so forth. And I left. I actually left Denmark July 2nd, 2015. I left in the central Copenhagen railway station, saying goodbye to my children. 2 girls that literally couldn't be pulled off my clothing. They were, crying and screaming that daddy couldn't go. I even gave my ex-wife a hug and said, I hope you all the best. So I left in good terms. You can't fight these things. Women in these sort of countries have absolute right, regardless what wrong they do. They're always going to be right, because most people within the social system are females. Social workers are more or less always females. The whole system is completely, in favor of females. So there's nothing you can do. And with the public record behind me, I knew I couldn't battle this one. She was going to get custody, and I knew she was probably going to travel anyway. So why stay? And I left. I had contact with my children over Skype throughout 2015 and through to February 16, when my children suddenly went off the grid. I completely lost contact. The channel on Skype that I used to talk to my children on was completely closed down or canceled, and I have not spoken to my children since then. I had otherwise nice normal daily talk, read bedtime stories to my children over Skype, had a good conversation, didn't speak badly about my ex-wife, and so forth. I even have videos of recordings from these Skype calls, so I could use them for later use for my children when they grow up, because I had a feeling that, I had predicted all of this, and the way everything from 2014 and forward, I predicted it the day that these things started to happen, and they happened exactly the way I thought they would. So currently, I have no contact with my children. I've tried to contact the Danish government, try to figure out things. They don't know anything. No one knows anything. I don't know where my children are. I research things on the internet, try to figure out if I can find things. I've written my ex-wife that whatever she's doing, it's wrong, and the children will eventually hold it against her, but nothing's happened. When I went to America and came to America in July 2015, I went to friends of mine, traveled a little in America, but eventually ended up at friends that have supported my work throughout the time that I've been published, and they let me stay, room and board for free, and actually started helping me with my asylum case, presenting, that I wouldn't be able to continue living in Denmark, doing what I do. And we had actually gone as far when we ended up in the situation with my children in February, when I lost contact with my children. I, at that point, had actually been coalition with, conversing with a lawyer that was now slowly presenting the case, and we were doing all this stuff. We were raising money, which a lot of money for an asylum case, 15,000. The lawyer believed deeply that I had a case, and absolute proof of persecution, even though it's not harsh like you talk about in other completely fascist or tyrannies around the world, former Russia. If you speak out against government in most of these authoritarian countries, a country like Denmark is different because everything is done in an obscured way, because the new way of persecution is making the person who speaks out against society and so forth look bad. And that's just the way that things are going to go. This is what I think America might start facing too. You will not see a society in America either that does what they do in tyrannical governments such as former communism in China, and Russia, and China, and so forth. It's never going to be that way, because the whole idea is to make sure that the government doesn't look bad in the democratic version of socialism. I left and went back, and I made a video very shortly. I made it in April. I had 2 months after February when my kids literally went off the grid, and I lived in America still, and continued my application for asylum, until I couldn't deal with this anymore. And I literally bought a plane ticket and went back to Denmark in I think it was the end of March or early April. I don't remember. I went back to Denmark. I was in Denmark 4 days, did some research, government, so forth. Couldn't find out anything. So that's all I have from there. I went to Spain. I worked in one of the tourist places all through the summer in Spain. And eventually I met this beautiful Russian lady, and I fell in love deeply. We both knew that it was going to be really hard for her to stay in Europe. So we chose both to just take a ticket and fly to Thailand, where I quite quickly got a job as a manager for a promotion team in a nightclub. And I ran that team for about 6 months until I started working online for an internet company in Europe. And I currently live in Thailand, and I have a good time. I live with a beautiful woman. I miss my children dearly. And of course, I am writing on my philosophy, the individualism. So to everybody out there, I currently can't, with this system, see any of the what do you call it? I'm just going to open a browser and check out some of the comments with you people out there, and see if, yeah, exactly. Let me see what people have written out there. Maybe there are some funny stories. Casper is definitely here. I made this video because of your request. Let me see what people are writing. People are writing some fun stuff. Not much here. I've had a few people come across. So the video is pretty long. I think I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to end this story. I am going to do live shows out there, and I know that the picture on this is not very good. I actually made a live broadcast a few days back. I did that from another computer with a better webcam, but unfortunately, you can't use this webcam, or I can't use that computer, which is an iPad, to broadcast, schedule a broadcast. You can't do that with an app on iPad, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd do it. So that way, this is a scheduled broadcast, and I'm going to try to set up better systems. I want to try to create shows in the future where I take people on the show and have more objective. Many people try to make shows out there, or broadcasts, where they take people that have some kind of status or are known. But I'm going to try to take people on board that have, just common Danish people with their normal opinion, people that have lived in Denmark and have normal fun debates about this system. Again, Casper is asking me if I like Thailand and if I've been called Farang. Yes, Farang simply means white man. It's not a bad word. A lot of people have the assumption that it's a bad word. It can, of course, be used as a bad word, but it really isn't. Yes, I like Thailand. There are certain things here I'm not going to talk about publicly. If you research Thailand, you would know why. You don't really speak out against the country. But no, the people here are beautiful. Buddhist people are calm, smiling, good people. Of course, you look like a dollar sign to them. There's not much money here, but they're good people, good by heart, and I am enjoying myself. Someone here is asking, Dalton is asking me what areas of America I've visited. I have lived. I've lived over a year in upstate New York, Hudson, where I worked with disabled people. That was one of the first places I ever lived. I was in Florida, where I, in my young days, had 5 children. I was an au pair. I've lived 4 years in San Francisco. Curiously, which is actually one of the places that really woke me up. The way I look at liberals today is actually that liberals are just confused libertarians. They have many of the rebellious things within them. They're just confused and don't know where to point and channel their anger. So they end up confused and don't know where they should go with anything. So they just but many of the things that they want are the same as the libertarians, except that they want big government because they're confused. But they're gonna. It reminds me of a story about my dad that goes down and votes for a political party in Denmark that is against free hash and marijuana whatsoever, and he he smokes and even grows marijuana in his garden, but he votes for a political party that is against it. Also, he votes for one of the political parties in Denmark that actually believes in extremely high taxes, the farthest socialist party in Denmark. And then he goes home to his, catering business and, evades taxes. Scandinavians by heart are hypocrites. And it's disgusting to see how these people just go down and put their vote and have no clue what they're voting for whatsoever. Someone else here, Carol, is asking me, yes, I would have absolutely, of course, I can't tell you with absolute certainty that I would have, that my asylum case would have gone through in America, because I simply didn't go through with the case because I left for Denmark. But I was told by the lawyer, who was a specialist in the field of asylum cases, that I would have absolutely won my case. Yes, sí, claro que sí, yo hablo español. Viví en España de 7 número, how would you say seasons? I forget it. Temporanos. Of course, I haven't spoken Spanish for many years, but of course, when you live in Spain, why wouldn't you learn the language? I mean, I'm even considering learning Thai here in Thailand. I speak 5 languages, but of course, you cannot. It's not like English that you have on TV and it's a part of your life every single day, regardless of where you live in the world. So it's there. Spanish is not part of daily life. So to uphold, olvídame español, claro que sí, que no hablo nada. So yes, I speak Spanish. Give me a few months in Spain, yes, and I also had a girlfriend at some point who was Spanish, so it taught me well, and they're pretty autonomous women, so there was a lot of little debates and so forth, and it was quite funny, and I learned a lot of Spanish. So yes, I do speak Spanish. I love Spain. If I'm ever going back, which I actually dream of, I really want to go back to Europe, but yeah, if I go back to Europe, it would definitely be Spain. I have considered going back to Denmark for more research, so I could research my philosophy or more thorough work. But I don't think, I don't know. I mean, from a standpoint, it would be hypocritical to ever go back. I hate it, and it's I live now in Thailand. I don't have the urge to drink whatsoever. What is Carol writing here? Funny. I follow a Swede and a Dane on YouTube for a living, and they do their shows in English. Of course. Why should I? I mean, I actually speak Swedish also. I had my early childhood in Sweden, and most of my family actually live in Sweden, so I do speak Swedish too. Which is, of course, why Danish people have this. This is one of the things, again, and this is one of the funny things. And I don't know how much you've read from my book, Casper, but I actually propose or work with the concept of why Danish people try to have an Americanized accent, which is because this is one of the only places where you don't break the anti-law. I actually write this in there's a paragraph about it in chapter 5, I think, where I'm talking about how Danish people will find ways to be good about something, you know, without breaking the anti-law officially, you know. So yes, I'm absolutely a fool at math, but emotions is my thing. We all have, you know. I don't know what you're trying to write here, Carol. Not in native. I don't know what that means. Maybe you can rephrase your note. Someone else, Wilhelm is here. Thank you for the book and the time in DK. I'm still here and might go to Spain. Wilhelm, if you ever, anyone out there, you're most welcome to contact me via Facebook. You can live in Thailand. You can get a stable life here. It's very easy. You will live a decent lifestyle. I have about 7,000 kroners. I earn about $1,000. I work about three hours daily on the internet, and I make about $1,000 a month. And it's a pretty good salary. I work very little because I also work on my philosophy. My Dalton is asking my view on guns. I own my body, so of course I have the right to protect my body. There is of course another version on gun rights, which is the fact that if you take guns away from the people, the good people don't have guns and the bad people do. That's pretty simple. If you want any views on capital punishment, I'm absolutely deeply against capital punishment, and I am against punishment for 2 reasons, or capital punishment for 2 reasons. One is the fact that if you do make a mistake and execute someone, you can never change that mistake again if the person's dead. And also, I don't believe in capital punishment because 60 years in jail is a good punishment. Death is not punishment. So that's my view on that. Carol, I don't understand your questions. I'm sorry. Or is English part of their rebellion? I'm not. No. Oh, you're referring to the Danish or people out here. No, it is simply that English creates more viewers. And I don't have people. I might have Casper here that is following my work, but there are so few people in Denmark. I could publish the book in Danish, but I mean, 99% of all Danish people cannot even go, due to inhibitions, cannot even read through the first chapter of my book, and I haven't even gotten started at that point. Danish brainwashing in Denmark is extreme. A little fun story about my daughter was also how easy government in Denmark twists the truth and try to, you know, create problems out of anything. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I taught my children that they own their body and created these autonomous girls. And of course, as a child, my oldest daughter, started slowly to experimenting with these things. And when she started school, when she had sports, she simply did not want to shower with the other kids after sport. And slowly, this became something that had the, what do you call it, insinuation that there might be a form of abuse. It is just simply amazing how these people can twist any truth. I can, though, look you straight in the face and tell you that I will see my children. I was a great dad. I brought up 2 children that will be in a lot of problem because they are, their mom has quite a case on her hands when they really become teenagers, because I brought them up with child psychology from an individualistic perspective, and really creating a great ego. A couple of examples of child psychology is I always worked with inverting the ego as an example, where you ask your child, when a child, the way that you can view Danish people or socialists in general is that they're simply, adults with a child ego. They're not much different. If you start taking the way children behavior is and then looking at socialists, it's not different whatsoever. You have more cake than me. It's typical childish behavior, envy. And also narcissistic supply, which I work with a lot, which is something that is very common and normal. Not common, but it's absolutely normal in the child, that in the upbringing, or in the growing up, the child will look for narcissistic supply from the parent, and they will draw a drawing for you, for example, and they will come to you, like in my case with my oldest daughter and youngest, of course, come to me and say, Daddy, I drew a drawing. Don't you think it's beautiful? And I would, of course, start off. This is a slow process where you kind of change this, where I would say, of course, it's a beautiful drawing, but Liv, which is her name, is it important that I think it's a beautiful drawing, or is it important that you like your drawing? Of course, I like your drawing, but what's really important? And of course, eventually, over time, slowly, my daughter would, find this encouragement within herself. I love my drawing, and didn't need anyone to say. She could, of course, ask. And if she drew me a drawing, I would be happy. I still have the drawings. But another example of child upbringing and opposing this whole mentality, or what is very important in the psychology of the socialist mind game, which is the inverting the ego to get narcissistic supply from creating low self-esteem, and then automatically you get narcissistic supply, which is a common thing in the child, because the child has to build their self-esteem, whereas the socialist has been all through life subjugated emotionally, subliminally, and low self-esteem has been created, and then they're in need of narcissistic supply. So this is one element that you can use in child upbringing from an individualistic perspective. Another thing, and this is definitely something Casper can use when you hopefully get children. You ask your child, what do you do when you meet someone who's better than you? And of course, in the beginning they don't know, but eventually you would give them the answer, which is, I would listen. I always had the philosophy that you must always listen to people. Give everyone a chance to and hear them out. Rather listen to a person for an hour that might be an idiot, than risking listening to a person for not listening to this person for an hour, and then it was someone who could really give you a great perspective. So always tell your child, or teach them that, if you meet someone who's better than you, listen, because why? Because you want to be just as great as them, if not even try to create a better achievement than this. And you can only do this through listening. This is Americanism, which is benign envy, to always look up to those who has better achievements than you and try to achieve the same. So I think I've gotten to a point where I'm going to end it for tonight. I don't know how long I've spoken. I have absolutely no control over this live event. There are all these gadgets you have to control. It's quite new for me. I'm going to try to make it a little more fun. So there are certain things where we speak about, things, and then, I might even bring someone like Casper on board, and we can debate individualism, or why someone like Casper feels different, or and I'm saying so because I know that the type of people that follow me would definitely be people that have always felt that they were different, because the whole idea about collectivism is don't stand out from the flock. And that means you get ostracized if you speak against them, which is disgusting, because you always have to agree with everything they say. It doesn't matter how stupid it is. I mean, I usually say a socialist can make this bottle not be here right now. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is you try to explain to them. They love euphemisms and twist the truth. So existentialism is the key, and individualism, existentialism is the same thing, more or less. Look behind everything. Look behind the words. What is welfare? Is welfare really welfare for me if I don't want to participate? Good question to ask, right? No, it's abuse. So these are the things to go in and look for. This is what I did my entire life. I always, was in these situations where it doesn't matter who you are out there. I don't care if you're an anarchist, if you're a libertarian, or whoever you are. If you say something out there that I can be critical of, and not from a negative, it's not a negative perspective, but question, then I will question it. I had a guy the other day that kind of worked with me about this whole Zionism, and my problem with some of the elements of Freemasonry and all of this stuff. I don't. For me, it's not important who the subjugators are out there. The important is to take away their tools, educate people in the tools used to subjugate you. So that the subjugator can't use it, because everything in the world right now is emotional. We don't really see them. The really, really big guys out there are not visible. We can, of course, always point fingers, but I always question this. The founders of America were Freemasons, and you cannot find anything in the world that is as individualistic as the American Constitution. It had its small flaws, in it that I work with a lot. But no, folks out there, I really enjoyed tonight. I'm going to try to be a little more professional in my work, doing what I do, and try to bring more people on the show that are real Danes, that have a critical view of Denmark, and try to, make things a little bit different. Not this thing about famous people or people that are known, and try to make something different, and get the truth out about how messed up this communist country is. Again, euphemisms, democratic socialism, or liberal country, or whatever they want to call it. But from anyone who has eyes can see that the whole entire structure of Denmark, 38% of all people working in Denmark are working for government. We are talking about a country with 5.6 million, 1.2 million people work for government, and only 900,000 people work for private business or corporations whatsoever. The whole economy is a mind game that has one single incentive, which has already happened, which is a humongous debt. So the big banks can earn money off you being a slave through taxes. And it doesn't matter what you do, because it's already there. And already now, the Danish people are bank slaves. Denmark has the highest personal household debt in the world, which is almost three times as much as the average American citizen. I am not someone who works completely with conspiracy, but I absolutely see Marxism as a creation for one single purpose, which is absolutely corporatism. The only winner in the end is the people that move in, and you already see this with Dong Energy in Denmark, and they're already talking about how the Danish railway system is supposed to be sold to private or privatized, which I absolutely have no problem with. The problem is just that it should have happened from the beginning. So the problem, and what you're seeing and what you're going to see in Denmark in the future, is you're going to see a Denmark that slowly goes through the same thing that happened after the fall of communism in Russia. I'm going to take my girlfriend on board here and talk about what life really is about at some point in the future also. She grew up in post-communist Russia, horrendous life, beautiful girl, deeply rebellious, very far right-winger, has her emotional problems like anyone who would have grown up in a SHIT hole like Russia. And yeah, so I'm going to try to do this stuff. I enjoyed you folks, or everyone out there, coming on board, checking me out for a minute. I don't have many people watching. It's been about 10 people on average. But no, I actually just did this one to go public. Casper had a few questions, and I did this video from a request. And I think I'm going to say that this is it. I enjoyed this hangout, and but yeah, Casper, social engineering is indeed everywhere in Denmark. I'm happy you're awake. I might invite you on board. We can talk about Denmark from your viewpoint, someone who's still living there, and have a little debate at some point, should you be interested. So folks out there, I really enjoyed. Till next time, I hope to see you again. Do remember, everything I told tonight will be used against me. It's absolutely normal. So, but I'm not afraid of truth. Everyone out there, have fun. Please share my work out there and keep fighting. You own your body, and socialism is slavery. Till next time, have fun.